Hello and welcome to the Wildcard Rewind podcast. Today we are talking about sleepers, and we've got a fantastic guest to do it with us. Let's get into it.
I just wanna rewind to when we were young at heart. Back to all those good times. Take me back to the start.
Yes, hello and welcome back to the Wildcard Rewind podcast. We are talking sleepers today. I'm coming to you from rural Wales. I don't think we've had a smoothly delivered intro in about 4 weeks. I think someone stumbled through something at all points, but at least Hannah, I remembered to click the button and actually play the intro this week. You'll have heard me mention there it's the best two this week, but we're joined by a special guest as well. But before we bring him in, Hannah, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks, Lewis. I'm kind of glad you made a little boo too in the intro. It makes me feel a little bit better. So I'm a bit relieved we're all a bit out of sorts, but we're getting towards the regular season now. We're going to be back in the zone, back in the game. Really excited. We've got an awesome guest this week. We're going to have loads of fun. I'm looking forward to it.
It is very exciting, and I'm going to bring you in, Murph. So we have the fantastic Murph of 5 Yard Rush, one of the absolute gurus of the UK scene. Actually, the man that gave me one of my first ever writing opportunities. So sort of led to everything that's all here now. Murph, how are you doing? Thank you so much for coming in.
Well, mate, a pleasure, and thank you very much for the warm intro. Yeah, it's not often you get called a guru. I don't know about that. Some call me a degenerate. Some call me just that annoying bloke from Twitter, but yeah, no, it's a real pleasure. I've never been on the Rewind show before, so I'm glad that we can do this all together. A bit sad Paul's not here, but you know, some people wilt in the heat, and obviously that's what Paul has done. He's wilted, either that or he's really embarrassed by ChatGPT's prediction of what the Arizona Cardinals are going to do this year. Because I decided to ask ChatGPT what the NFL was going to happen this year, so I didn't have to bother watching any of the games and could just claim victory now. Just thought I'd save myself some time. It's a busy time. Yeah, the Arizona Cardinals are going 3-14 this year, and they're going to end up with the 1 pick. So there you go.
I mean, it doesn't sound too far off the truth. Paul would come back at you about how MHJ is the best receiver to ever play the game before he's even stepped onto the pitch. But you know, you do in the NFL tend to need more than one wide receiver, and I'm not so convinced that the Cardinals do have a second one at all.
I like Michael Wilson, actually. I think people are sleeping on him. I very nearly, spoiler alert to what we're going to be talking about today, I was pretty close to putting him on there, but I just don't know how much I trust the Arizona Cardinals organization to actually utilize him properly, less so that it's a knock on him. I actually do quite like him, but yeah, Marvin Harrison Jr. being coined as like he's already basically got a place in Canton. We can put the bust up there and it's done and dusted already. Kid hasn't even, seen the field yet. So, it's interesting as always, but yeah, I feel bad for the Cardinals because they kind of have some interesting pieces, and they actually have quite a good coach. They just can't seem to make it happen.
I was watching a little bit, so we're in the middle of preseason now. We're actually getting some NFL action, and it might not be the most competitive of NFL action. And I say that as a Rams fan who, we don't get to see our starters in preseason, so I don't pay the hugest amount of attention. But it is really overreaction season. And the thing I was seeing from Trey Brenson's first appearance, where he looked like Austin Eckler last year, just sort of stumbling his way into the O-line. And my initial thinking that I was like, the problem I'm seeing here is that the O-line can't open a single hole for him. Like, yeah, there's no burst, but there's very few running backs in the NFL that can create something out of truly the nothing that offensive line was opening up in front of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a strange one. They've had like quite a few picks where they've been picking high up in the draft, and they've either opted to trade back and get more capital and then still haven't addressed any of the real positional needs. It's like, okay, you've gone out and got Marvin Harrison Jr. That's great. I mean, like, you've got Kyler and Marvin Harrison Jr. And then you got Trey Benson, because we all know the wheels are going to fall off. We've turned into an Arizona Cardinals podcast, but we'll be so proud that we've done this. But yeah, haven't bothered to address either of the trenches. But hey, who needs offensive and defensive line? They're really, if they're not in fantasy football, do they even exist?
You can get to the Super Bowl without an offensive line. That
You
I can
can-
attest to.
You can, and you can also lose really badly in the Super Bowl. Just ask Patrick Mahomes, the one he did lose, and how badly he lost that. Did he throw a touchdown pass? No, he didn't. But and look, it is preseason. I haven't even ribbed Hannah yet that the Bengals lost to the Buccaneers in preseason,
They
and the
did.
only starter that we played was Graham Barton.
I know it's true. To be fair, our second and third stringers are pretty rubbish. But Burrow was his first action for ages, and he looked all right. So
Yeah,
I'm happy with that.
yeah. Burrow looked good. Logan Woodside looked good.
Yeah, I know Blooming Browning looked the worst.
Yeah, it was awful. And Bucky Irving scored, so it's all good. We know he's going to have a big season.
Exactly. When I was looking through, we always start off with the big news of the week, and I was going to start thinking about this player did well in preseason. We saw some highlights from this player, but I really don't want to start feeding into the hype of
No,
overhyping.
Stop.
Because a lot of the time what you'll see is, well, this player had a fantastic preseason, and it'll be like 2 catches, 38 yards, and yeah, they might have been 2 nice catches, but it's not really worth thinking about just yet.
No.
But the big news that I did want to think about is something which is actually something that hasn't happened yet. So obviously this offseason we've seen a huge amount of contract extensions. We've had a gigantic class of wide receivers who have been eligible to be extended this offseason. I think we kicked off with Amon-Ra St. Brown. We've seen Justin Jefferson. We've seen some absolutely monster extensions. And the smartest thing to do in these situations is always try and get ahead of the market. But one of the teams that aren't very smart in this is the Dallas Cowboys, who still have their 3 best players yet to pay, and all 3 of them looking for either an extension or actually their first contract off the back of a rookie contract. But CeeDee Lamb is the big one. CeeDee Lamb has started to upset me when I go on Sleeper, because when I go to put him into lineups, you're looking, the projections are there and they don't mean anything, but can I set my lineup and see how much I'm going to win by in week 1? And CeeDee Lamb's not showing anything because it's showing up as a DNR because he's holding out because there's no contract. As this continues to rumble on, we'll start off with you, Murph, and then I'll come to you as well, Hannah. Are you worried at all that he could end up missing the start of the season, and is it going to affect the way that you're drafting him?
Nah. Ultimately not. So I don't have him as my wide receiver 1 overall, and it's not a slight on him. I have him as my wide receiver 2 overall. I just fancy Tyreek Hill to get to the top of the mountain. Yeah. I always take the proven commodity until someone tells me otherwise. It's boring, but it tends to be a good gut instinct to go to. No, listen, the Cowboys are slow. You've said it. They're slow. They were slow with Dak Prescott. They've been slow with Zeke Elliott in the past when he got his contract. The Cowboys they're a showy organization. Everything is for show. And they want the eyes of the world when they stump up and pay CeeDee Lamb $33 million a year. Because that was going to happen. Like, I got no doubt in my mind they're going to break the bank for CeeDee Lamb. It's going to be around $33 million a year on average. It's going to be the biggest contract because that's what Jerry does. And they're just waiting for more eyes. The cynic in me just says it's too early. There's not enough eyes on it yet. And he's now seeing, like, Heed the Call is back with Dan Hansis and Mark Sessler, and he's seeing it all starting to build up, and he's like, I'll give it another sort of 10 days, and then I'll dust this off sort of after the 3rd preseason game, but before the cuts happen, or maybe just after the cuts happen, and then we'll do it, and then we'll do a big song and dance about how we've made CeeDee Lamb. I'm not worried about it. Like, I think if it was any other team, I'd probably start to be a little bit more concerned, especially if it was like the Jets, and there was some news that's come out of the Jets in the last sort of 35, 40 minutes or so. I would be more concerned. Yeah. But I would say that, no, I expect CeeDee Lamb to get paid, and I expect him to start the season, and all things will be fine.
Lovely. And how about for you, Hannah? With CeeDee Lamb, obviously there's sort of a flat tier of wide receivers up at the top of drafts. When you're starting sort of your redraft leagues at the minute, is it at all starting to make you think, actually I do have, Tyreek Hill or Jamar Chase at the same level, and maybe I'll consider taking them over? Or are you the same as Murph, that you're thinking he's going to get paid, it's not going to be a problem, he'll be fine?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I at this point, I'm really not that worried. Like, there's still plenty of time before the regular season starts. Maybe if it was like, 3 days before the first game, I'd be starting to get more twitchy. But we've still got plenty of time at this stage. We're looking at 3 weeks. They're going to get it done. There's no way Jerry's not going to do it. Whether they're going to pay Dak is another question, which I think probably is going to be a no, which would be super interesting going into next season. But why would you let CD go? I mean, why wouldn't you pay him? It just doesn't make sense to me to get rid. Like, I can see why they might let Dak walk and keep CD over him. They're going to pay him. It's just going to happen. I think, again, CD just wants them to realise how much he's worth, which I think they do. But you know what Jerry's like? He likes to drive a hard bargain and then pay the most money. So
Act like he's driving a hard bargain and then drive absolutely no bargain at all.
exactly that.
Lovely. So let's carry on into our sleepers show. So I wanted to start off by asking a few questions in terms of how you approach then the last few rounds of your drafts, because obviously we're going to go through and name a sleeper each at every position. But I think there's a little more theoretical thing here in terms of, are you looking in sort of those later rounds to try and find players that you can see the path to volume, you can see, a Greg Dortch who might have an ability to be a wide receiver 3, or are you really trying to sort of chase the ceiling, maybe at the backup running back position that you think they can take the job? We'll come to you first, Murph. How do you tend to kind of approach the last few rounds of your draft when it comes to, players going a little more under the radar?
I do a bit of both, to be honest. In the higher double-digit rounds, I'm looking at volume and pathways to volume is always an easier way to project consistency, especially at that end of the roster. So for me, I'm looking at people that perhaps have a real clear pathway to an accelerated role, and typically running backs is the easier place to find. We'll name some sleepers that we'll go through. So I'm not going to sort of name some players who I would say, but there's a clear pathway to them getting a huge or significant volume to where they're fantasy relevant. And then they become either additional currency or your roster, or they fill in for injuries and bye weeks, etc., that you might need. And then literally the last couple of picks. So I rarely take a kicker unless it's really close to the season or it's in a league that I'm sort of managing, but I'm kind of not. How should I put this?
Yeah.
It's not one of my main leagues, and therefore, like, just having a kicker means it's one less thing to do before the start of the season. But typically, I wouldn't take a kicker, and then I would shoot for that high upside pick. So I'd be looking at players who potentially are so under the radar and so not there that they come up every year, and you take your draft lottery picks. And there's a couple of reasons for doing this. One is because if you hit, and it is such a small probability that you're going to hit, then you're made, because you've either got that person on your roster or they're good enough to trade and you can acquire assets that you need, which is phenomenal either way. And then if you don't, then how I run my rosters is I like to have fodder. I like to have people who I can easily just get a churn for constant waiver wire activity. So you give these people a bit of time, but not loads of time, 4 weeks maybe, and then you're like, okay, it's not happened. And yeah, every now and again, you'll chuck a player back into the pool, and then they'll come back and hit. But at the same point, I think it's good to have constant roster churn and having people that you're going to take a shot on, and if they land, and we've seen it every year, and you're going to talk about it in a minute, players that will always come out of there. So you've got to buy a ticket in the raffle to win it, right? So, but I don't like that idea of picking 4 people like that. Yep. And the reason why is because all of a sudden you're truncated in value. You're sitting there with 4 lottery tickets. If you miss them all, that's a lot of waiver wire activity you're going to have to make. And you're effectively behind. You're two players on your bench behind every other team. So that's why I like to have 2 players with a pathway to volume, and they're a handcuff, or they've got a role and a handcuff. That's my preferable, where they have a role, and it might be a wide receiver role, or it might be a running back role, and they're going to get some touches. But then if an injury happens, there's a pathway to them being a lot more productive, and they're the next guy up. I'd rather have a couple of those and just spread my risk, because I think if you shoot for 4 lottery tickets and you miss on 4, you're going to have to work your absolute tail off to get back to parity, not even get ahead of the rest of the league. And so that's kind of how I view it from a roster construction perspective.
I think that's a really interesting point, and I really like the way you go into, and it's something Hannah and I have spoken about before, in terms of timelines and in terms of knowing with a player, okay, I'm taking an upside shot here because I think they have a chance to grab this role. But to be honest, I'm going to know by week 2 whether or not they've got it. If it's someone that I think is going to have a role, not through injury, they're just going to grab it, straight off the bat, I'm going to know in the first couple of weeks whether or not they've got it. And then I can get rid of them and I can move on to something else. I think the worst thing is almost that sunk cost fallacy of, I've taken a sleeper, I think they have an upside, I have to keep them on my bench for the rest of the season in case it works out. And it very rarely does. And this is sort of the context here that, chances are very few of these players work out. But if they do, they potentially have that league winning upside.
Yeah, and you've absolutely nailed it there with that point on sunk cost. That's the really big part of this. So people hold on to values of draft far too long. The second in redraft, your draft is finished, those costs are gone. Yeah. You've already spent it, you've already paid it, and you're not playing Dynasty, so you can't get picks back. So evaluating them of, I spent a 3rd round pick on that, I don't care, because it doesn't exist anymore. That's the problem. It's like buying, and this is a horrible analogy, but I can't think of a better one. It's like buying a car. The second you drive it off you take it out of the dealership, it devalues. Now, it's very different in fantasy football because you can have high rising assets, and someone will come to you, oh, well, you drafted Puka Nakua in the 12th round. Like, how can you want Garrett Wilson for him? Well, yeah, I do. Because that's where they are. It doesn't matter. It's all moving pieces. But you're right. People hold on to players who's like, I drafted them, I've got to hold on. Absolutely not. You can draft sleepers and you can actually cut them before the season. If you really have seen preseason, you've seen how it's all played out, and you look at the final roster depth charts, and you're like, hey, my guy's just too far back on there. You don't even need to wait till week 1. You can do, and it's prudent to. But if you see another dart that you missed, you think there's a pathway to him that might be slightly better, don't be afraid. Like, people are so afraid to make mistakes. Like, I've made so many. I've made so many mistakes where I've cut people too early. That's part of it. Like, you're not going to make 100% of decisions right. Do you know what? You're not even going to make 70% of your decisions right. If you're batting 600, if you're batting 60%, you're winning. That's so you're going to make bad decisions. You have to get comfortable with making bad decisions. And that includes letting sleepers go too early. But the more that you just constantly churn over, you're buying more tickets to the lottery. Yeah. So you just keep turning it over. If as soon as the news goes, it's not going your way, buy out of it. Go and move into a different option, because you could still pick up someone who then has a chance. And I've made those decisions. I did it a lot last year with Puka Nakua. I was very late on the Puka Nakua train, like ridiculously late, probably one of the last people. But I was still able to acquire him in places before the season and got rid of the sleepers I did back over him and got in, because I was like, well, I sunk my cost. I thought Cooper Cup would be back. He's not back. My analysis was wrong. I'm big enough to admit that. I'm going to go get Puka Nakua. And it works. You can do that. You just got to keep up to date and outwork the rest of your league.
Absolutely. And with you mentioning Puka Nakua, and we've obviously started thinking about the sleepers from last year. Last year was a really unique year. Because we had really a litany of players that were not just, sleepers, but league winners at their position. So the 4 that I put together were Puka, Kyron Williams, Tank Dell, and Sam Laporta. Obviously, 3 of which were rookies, but were all, absolute fantasy superstars last season. We'll start with you, Hannah. What can we learn from these players in particular going into next season?
I know that Murph's probably got a lot more to say about this, so I'm just going to keep mine kind of short and sweet, because a lot of what I kind of feel is similar, I guess, to what I think Murph is going to say. But ultimately, for me, it is like, don't be afraid to take these shots, whether that is at the back end of your draft or on the waiver wire. I am a very risk-averse fantasy player, and last year that worked to my detriment. So I was like, oh, I need a bit more time to see if Puka Nakua is going to be anything, because I don't want to spend all my fab on him if he's not going to do anything. Well, ultimately, that was to my detriment, because if I'd have spent all my fab and got him on my team, I probably would have won the league.
Yeah.
So I think you just really, a lot of what we were talking about before, I think, is that people are scared to look stupid in front of their league mates. You know, I don't even think it's necessarily that they are scared to take risks for themselves. I think they're scared that someone in the chats can be like, oh, why have you dropped this player? You spent a third on him. What are you even doing? You know, and I think people are just scared to not care and just be like, right, I'm going to put all my fab in. If he's rubbish, he's rubbish. I'm going to lose. But if he's good, I'm going to win the league because he basically finishes as a wide receiver 1. Now, of course, we're not going to get those every year that are going to go from 0 to hero. You know, a lot of these kind of last round guys will ultimately end up being maybe wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3, 4. You know, you're not going to get the ones that actually are these full-on wide receiver ones, particularly I think as the wide receiver position. Running back may be a bit different if you've got injuries in front and blah, blah, blah. So I think just don't be scared. Again, I'm one of these players. I need to say this to myself, you know, just be brave. Drop the guy that's not performing, even if you picked him up in the 6th round. You know, Cortland Sutton as an example a couple of years ago or whatever. You know, just do it. Pick up someone who is going to, you know, actually be useful and be valuable to you, instead of hanging on to all of these dead leggers because you're embarrassed to drop them and you don't know who to pick up. You know, I think it really is just not being scared, because ultimately taking risks is what's going to help you win. You know, in a small league, you're 1 of 12, right? Finishing second doesn't mean anything. You know, you want to win. So you've got to take the risks and go for it. If you finish last, okay, maybe you've got to do a silly, you know, whatever forfeit. But at least you took the risk. You know, you're either going to lose or you're going to win. But those that don't take risks finish in the middle and they don't win. As I have learned many years. Be brave. Do it.
As Hannah says, very much from experience, as maybe the most risk-averse fantasy player that I know.
Yeah.
Let's come over to you, Murph, because you've done a little bit of digging into sort of some of the situations and some of the statistics that actually we could have identified in advance to be able to spot these players, and then thinking about how we can translate that to 2024.
Yeah, so look, these people, these situations don't come from nowhere. People think it's luck. It's not luck. It's calculated risk. And there is a difference between that. Yes, of course, everything in fantasy football is an element of luck. It's got to be health. Things have got to go each way. We talked about Puka Nakua, and we talked about him going off and Kyron Williams. But the reason that situation kind of occurred, and your Rams, and so Lewis, you know this better than probably anyone here, is there was a lot of flux about the Rams. They had a poor year coming out the season before. Matt Stafford was injured. He played Baker Mayfield at quarterback the season before. Cooper Kupp was injured. We weren't sure if he was going to be ready week 1. In fact, they kept hyping up he was going to be ready week 1. Then he wasn't ready week 1. And there's all this the running back position. Cam Akers wasn't the guy. It was all a bit of a flux. Like, we went into the season with the Rams and we just went, we don't know what we're getting. And that's the truth. We didn't know what we were getting with the LA Rams. And that's where these situations arise. They don't arise on teams which we're going into and we know it's going to happen. So you don't need to look at teams like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Cincinnati Bengals. All right, the Bengals have got to change at running back and there's a little bit of chaos there. But the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is a pretty flat team. They haven't really changed. You know, does anyone really care about who Sterling, like people talking about Sterling Shepard as a potential breakout candidate at his age on a roster because he played with Baker Mayfield? We know what that team is. You don't need to start looking in areas where we know what we're going to get. So don't look at the stable teams. You can pretty much cut out the NFC South. Like, everyone's getting really hyped about Atlanta, but the personnel is the same. Other than Darnell Mooney, the personnel's very similar. So we don't need to get too hyped up. We don't know entirely what's going to happen, but we know a lot of it. So let's not chase rabbit holes on stability. Let's chase it where there's chaos. And so the teams that are coming in this year, and chaos by that, I want to mean teams that have undefined outcomes at this stage. So you looked at last season, the teams that were in real flux, and they're all represented in your sleepers. The Texans, we had no idea. They hired a new head coach. They took a quarterback. They took multiple wide receivers in the draft. They signed running backs. They basically were a new team. We didn't know. We all thought it was going to be crap. But really, we didn't know that for a fact. And it's clear that we all got it wrong. It's a situation of chaos. Detroit was showing improvement. And everyone thought, well, Laporta's not going to be a big thing. There's never really been a big tight end for a few years. Doesn't really matter. It's Jared Goff. And then all of a sudden, they were one of the best offenses in the NFL. Jameson Williams didn't come along like people thought he was going to come along. And there's a vacancy and a vacuum there, and that leads to, well, someone's got to catch the ball. And Laporta took his opportunity. So we're looking at places where there's opportunities. Quickest way to do that is vacated targets and vacated rushes. So I've identified teams where there is this flux. And this is where we kind of want to look at this flux. And some of my sleepers buy a little bit into this, but then some of them don't, because there's a separate situation aside which can cause chaos. And I'll get to that when we explain the individual sleepers. But right now, the biggest team in absolute chaos is the Los Angeles Chargers. Because we've got a new head coach. We've got a new offensive coordinator. We've got a new GM. So the whole organization has changed. And then on top of that, okay, we know Justin Herbert, but they let all their wide receivers go out the door except for Jalen Guyton and Josh Palmer. And they drafted Quentin Johnston, but he didn't do anything. But, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams have gone. Austin Eckler, gone. Gerald Everett, gone. So all of their major targets, rushes, are out the door. So it is a situation that is in pure chaos. So that is ripe for sleepers. If you pick the right target in the Chargers and you get him at a good price, or whatever price, because they're all a good price. You look at the highest rated ADP on any of those players in the receiving ranks, it's what, 10th round? At best, like probably the highest you'll get a Charger receiver, because no one knows. That's where you get your sleepers, because no one knows what's going to happen. Same with the running back position. Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, Vidal. Who's it going to be? We think it's going to be Gus Edwards. That would make logical sense. But he has injury problems. J.K. Dobbins always gets hurt. Maybe Vidal comes through. So if you're buying into this idea of finding these sleepers, look at these situations that are purely chaotic and go, I'll buy cheap pieces of that. Because if it hits, I've got an undervalued asset that I'm going to ride all the way to the playoffs. And if I'm wrong, I can just cut them because I spent very, very little acquiring pieces of that. Other teams in here, Buffalo, Stephon Diggs left, Gabe Davis left. So there's 317 targets that have gone out the door. So everyone's like, well, is it Keon Coleman? Is it Curtis Samuel? Is it Khalil Shakir? In that situation, I'm taking the cheapest option, which is Khalil Shakir. And I'm like, great, I'll buy him because his price is so cheap. And if he hits, because he's the incumbent. The other two are new. So he knows Josh Allen. He knows the playbook. He knows the coaching staff. If he survives and thrives, I get a really good piece of a really cheap asset. But if you're buying into any of that, it's great. So, there's a really case there. Washington's a great one. We got a new OC there, a new head coach, and head coach is defensive. And this is really important. When you've got a defensive head coach, he's not getting involved in the offense. So he's not bringing in this offensive scheme. So whoever the OC is holds even more weight and water. When you see someone like Cliff Kingsbury coming in the door, you're like, okay, right, we've got to stand up. We've got to pay attention. Who are these short to medium distance targets? And you could buy a couple of the Washington wide receivers because there's nearly 274 targets available from last season. And yes, okay, we've got a new quarterback, so maybe we lose some of those targets to his rushing ability. It's still going to be 230-ish. Yeah. Give or take targets available. Someone's got to catch the ball. They got a new tight end in Ben Sinnott. You can take a dart throw on him. He's free. I know they got Zach Ertz. Do we really expect him to stick around long enough? I mean, there's enough pieces in this offense to where you can buy these sleepers. Jacksonville's another one. Calvin Ridley's gone. Zay Jones has gone. There's 251 targets out the door. So, and you've got Brian Thomas and you've got Gabe Davis we talked about. Take a shot on one of those guys. One of those guys has got to thrive and get the ball. So they're your sleepers. running back position, Dallas is an absolute quagmire. You can buy any of those players at a good price and take a hit. And Cincinnati's, because you've got Joe Mixon, it's do you go with Chase or do you go with Zach Moss? Yeah. So you're like, well, which one do I go with? Chase Brown, Zach Moss? Pick a lane, but you're buying into it. And they're priced accordingly to where there's such a low price that it just makes sense. And if you get it wrong, you get it wrong. It doesn't matter because what you're paying, like 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th plus round picks, it's not going to kill your team. But if you get it right, you elevate your team. So it's just about being comfortable with, as Hannah said, not holding on too long, just taking a shot. And you make a really good point that people are scared. People are scared because of this. It's since lockdown. Lockdown really brought this community together so much. Like in so many ways, people did lots of drafts, people bonded together. Like we as a UK playing community would not be where we were without lockdown. So many people got together and built that community. But what has happened is this bit of groupthink / too scared to make a mistake and be shown up for it, as Hannah says. And actually, you won't win that way. You'll do all right, but you won't win. You have to take the big play and the big risks. And if you do that, you will win titles. You'll lose titles from some of your decisions, but you've got to be comfortable with it. So I look at places where they've changed the head coach. The offensive coordinators, I think, is a big piece that's massively underrated. Look at the offensive coordinators. Like, give you a great example. People are massively undervaluing Chris Godwin in drafts. His price is ridiculous. Now, he's not a sleeper. We can't call him a sleeper. He's going in the 6th, 7th round. But, Lewis, you saw Liam Cohen. You know how Liam Cohen runs an offense.
Yeah.
And you know that what he's going to do with Chris Godwin is he's going to feed him the ball. And so we've got proof of a offensive coordinator in the NFL who doesn't go with the deep ball quite as much as his counterparts. He likes those to dominate in the short intermediate areas of the field. And so people are drafting Mike Evans at his ceiling last year. And you're like, Mike Evans had the best season he had in 4 or 5 years. And that's great. But his offensive coordinator's gone. The whole system's going to change. So you can't buy him at 1,300 yards. So you have to buy him at a cheaper price. And then so go with the opposite way. If you've got an offensive coordinator change, if you can't work out what the scheme is and you don't know what's going to happen, a really good rule of thumb is take the lower priced individual. So, for me, for years, it was in Seattle. Hey, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. Change in OC. Tyler Lockett's 4 rounds cheaper. I'll take Tyler Lockett. Now, he finishes 20 points short of DK Metcalf some years. 20 points is about a point a week, just over a point a week. Hey, I got him 4 rounds later. So I made up the point a week with the picks in between. So you're going to get the value. And I think that's the thing. In situations where there's been these changes, take the cheaper asset, buy in cheap with it. You don't have to pretend to be an expert. You don't have to lay out on the line. Hedge your bets. It's a good way of doing it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really smart, and I really like looking through some of the specific situations. And also, when you're looking at what we can learn from those rookies or from those sleepers from last year, you see the phrase, the next Puka Nacua, everywhere. And the point is that Puka Nacua was a flash in a pan because he was injured in college, but really productive, slipped in the draft, very specifically the perfect fit for Sean McVay and for the way in which Sean McVay uses his wide receivers, and then also the Cooper Kupp injury. Like, there won't be another Puka Nacua. But what you can do is you can look and go, well, what was the thing that made that? What was actually the situation around him that made that? And I don't think we do enough, because I think we think about the individual players as if it was just the case that Puka Nacua played his way into that and Kyron Williams played his way into that, and that the chaos theory around it, I think, is such a smart way to go. That, like, there were signs that we weren't going to be right on those situations. So I think it's a really smart way of looking at it. Let's start going on to...
I'll just make one last point on that.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to literally one-liner on this, is that if you're looking for the 2023 Houston Texans in absolute chaos, it's the 2024 Chicago Bears. Because you've got a new OC, you've got a new quarterback in the draft. They've brought in Keenan Allen. They've paid DJ Moore, and they drafted the first round wide receiver in Roman Dunze. So for me, I look at that situation, and Roman Dunze's not a sleeper because he's going in the 9th to 11th round, depending on what platform you're playing on. I was all out on Dunze. Like, all offseason, I'm like, nah, they're going to bring him along slow. I'm now actually of the opinion of his price is so attractive now that like the Keenan Allen thing's weird. Like, it's a weird acquisition for that team at that time. And the same goes for Houston Texans and Stephon Diggs. Like, people are just assuming they're going to come in and be target monsters because they have been. Well, they paid DJ Moore, so they're telling you what they think. That DJ Moore is the guy. So Keenan Allen isn't the guy, and he's never not been the guy in his entire career. So he's like, buy into the chaos. And I'm thinking, like, Keenan Allen is almost like a Trojan horse here, and he's steering us in the direction. Actually, I'm going to hedge the other way. The market's out on Roman Dunze, and it's gone so far. He was like a 6th round pick because of all the rookie hype. He's dropped like 4 rounds. I'm like, I'm in now. Like, I'm in on Roman Dunze because it's gone so far the other way that everyone's out. I want to follow the trends of the players that are falling. Because if there's no logical reason, if they're injured or carrying an injury, that makes sense. I don't want in. But if there's just no logical reason for it, I'll buy in on Dunze now because I actually think he could, if we're wrong in what we think, it's like shorting stock. Yeah.
It's always a smart idea to go the other way. I often think the same thing of, especially in Dynasty, when a player's value goes up for no reason, is the time to sell them. I'm very aware that we're halfway through and we've not got onto our picks yet.
Sorry,
because No. The theory side is such an interesting side of it. Let's start off with the quarterback position. And Hannah, I'm going to come to you first. Who's your sleeper at the quarterback position?
Okay, well, this year I'm going to say Geno Smith. Now, like, I actually just kind of feel like people have forgotten about Geno Smith, and I think, yes, I think the issue was last season the Seahawks weren't fantastic. I think a lot of the issues came from the O-line. They had quite a few injuries. The guys they had in weren't that great, and he didn't really have a lot of time to do the great work that we'd seen him do the year before, which was basically stand in the pocket and throw bombs around, which he just really couldn't really get into last year. However, we know that Carroll's gone, new head coach, new OC, chaos could ensue. I think the problem is that, Geno's been in the league a long time. Obviously, when he first became a starter at Seattle, we were like, oh, is it Geno? Is it Drew Lock? Now that sounds really stupid and feels stupid, right? But at the time, it was a full-on thing. Who is it going to be? Like, neither of them had proven to be any good. Then obviously he burst onto the scene. He did amazing. He actually finished in 2023 as like the QB5,
QB4, I think.
Well, 2022, wasn't it? Yeah, like something ridiculous. So on fantasy data, again, I know that there's different kind of sites to look at and different scoring systems, but he's on here as the QB5. So we know he can do it. And I think people potentially think that he was just a flash in the pan and that now he's kind of gone back to his kind of normal Geno self. Obviously, last season, he finished as the QB19, which is obviously quite a big drop. However, I think he still has great weapons around him. They've been saying a lot of great things about JSN, and they've been singing his praises all off season. The team believe in him. So do I. I mean, actually, the pieces around him haven't changed much, and he did that with them 2 years. Yes, okay, they're getting a bit older, but JSN's coming in now. I just think it's the perfect kind of opportunity for him to come back to being a QB1. And I don't understand why he's dropped all the way down there. I think people thought Sam Howell was going to come and take his job. Well, there's no signs of that. So come on, like, why are people like picking Geno Smith after Will Levis? Like, I think people like the idea of Will Levis's upside, and I get that. But Geno's shown it. We were talking about proven commodities. Geno has shown it 2 years ago. He finished in the top 5. So I honestly think he's a massive sleeper, and I think he could very easily finish as a low-end QB1 this season.
Yeah, and he can make sense. And just on that, like they brought in Ryan Grubb. Now, Ryan Grubb was the head coach at the University of Washington. He's someone who invented one of the most dynamic offenses in college football over the last couple of years. Doesn't always translate. There's a risk there, but people really like Roman Dunze. People really like Michael Penix Jr. People like what they did. These are players that went top 10 in the NFL draft, and it's because of Ryan Grubb and his system. So this is what I mean. You've got to buy into that chaos, but it's positive chaos. And I love that. I think there's every chance that could happen.
And one of the really interesting things about Grubb's offense as well, I mean, I know injuries aside, but it was an accurate pocket passer with a good deep arm, with enabling 3 wide receivers to go in the top 3 rounds of the draft. Yeah. And, I mean, it was first, second, and third rounds, but it was 3 wide receivers, and they were all productive on the field at the same time. I really like the Geno pick. I think it's an interesting one where we're really undervaluing because things kind of fell off last season, but a lot of things fell off for the Seahawks last season. So I think, yeah, it's one that I'm very interested in. Murph, I'm very intrigued by your pick because this is someone that no one really wants to draft. But as you've hinted at, sometimes that means you need to steer in the other direction. Who have you gone with?
I absolutely love players that nobody wants to draft because unless there's a logical reason, the logical reason on why you don't want to draft Deshaun Watson is he's a crap guy.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like, if your reason for not drafting Deshaun Watson is you morally don't agree with him, I'm all for that. I also guarantee you probably now pick Tyreek Hill. And this same thing happened a couple of years ago. I'm not advocating for Deshaun Watson, the person. Right? I'm going to draw this here because people say, oh, maybe I am. No, listen. But I play fantasy football without the emotional attachment of the players, which sounds quite ridiculous. It's a game played on paper, right? It's fake football. I'm not paying Deshaun Watson to be my quarterback, right? If it was all about human beings and all of that, then yeah, fine. But we're not. So let's get rid of the reason I'm in on Deshaun Watson is this guy in 2020 threw nearly 5,000 yards, right? He had 3 extremely productive years where we were talking about a player who was in the top 5, top 6 quarterbacks. A player who, when he went to Houston, the question, yeah, there was a bit of illegality, but it was more the fact this guy got a fully guaranteed contract for a lot of money. They paid him to be the franchise. He is still only 28. Now, listen, there's the last couple of years, there's been some shaky incidents. It's all kind of played out. He's had suspensions. He sat out an entire year. So he's not played a lot. But towards the end of last season, we started to see some signs of the old Deshaun Watson. And we started to see signs of him being that accurate passer. You then look at the fact that he's playing with a 2-time NFL Coach of the Year. That's never to be sneezed at. And then you look at his weapons. I mean, you have got Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore. They're talking about, but it doesn't look like they're going to bring Brandon Ayuk into there. They have one of the better wide receiver cores in the AFC. Then you've got the fact that he can throw passes to Nick Chubb, Jerome Ford, Donta Foreman's a pretty decent pass catching back. You're talking about you've got David Njoku we haven't even talked about. And Joe Flacco came in and he lit it up off the sofa. So if Deshaun Watson can get anywhere near back to his best, we're talking about a guy who's a former top 5 fantasy football quarterback in an offense that over the last 5 weeks of the season was the best offensive football with a 30-plus-year-old quarterback washed up who came in off the sofa to play. Didn't do any training. Just walked in and just lit it up. So all the signs point this is a really good team with a really good quarterback that if he can get back to his level, can absolutely finish in the. We're not talking about top 12. We're talking top 5. He can get back into the top 5 because this is a better receiving core as a whole than what he had in Houston when he was putting up this. In those numbers, he was just basically passing the Nuke Hopkins.
Yeah.
So he's now got a much better supporting cast. And we're saying, nah, he's the quarterback 22. Like, I'm not having it. I'm not having that he is a worse fantasy football quarterback than Baker Mayfield, Aaron Rodgers at 41, Matt Stafford. These guys are all better human beings. Don't get me wrong. Kirk Cousins off his Achilles injury.
Aaron Rodgers, I'm not so sure if he's a better human being. I mean, he is slightly, but he's not. It's not by much.
He's a better. I don't like Aaron Rodgers, but even I would say that Aaron Rodgers is a better human being than Deshaun Watson. But yeah, I'm all in on Deshaun Watson. I think we're now at the situation where we never used to take 2 QBs in draft, but with what has happened over the last few years with all these injuries, you now have to take a second QB because you don't want to be playing Ben DiNucci and all these other sort of bums that turn up off the couch and play. We don't want to see that anymore. We don't want to be like, as fun as it is talking about former NASA astronauts playing quarterback. Like, it's not what we want. Like, you want to have guys that you can rely on. Deshaun Watson is free. You can take him in the second to last round or whatever you want to take him. Quarterback 22. No one's drafting him in the 1 QB league.
No.
And if he turns to top 5, you're all the way to the bank.
It's a really interesting one that I often say that the best indication of future performance is previous performance. That's the only metric that shows any sort of logical ability to predict how well people are going to do in fantasy is, have they been good in fantasy football previously? And Deshaun Watson is a very unique case of someone who was elite at fantasy football. And yes, there's been a lot of off the field issues, but the upside is absolutely there. My pick was elite in fantasy football in 1 year. And the upside is still potentially there if he's on the field. I started off with Justin Fields in this slot, but actually Justin Fields is going higher than I thought he was. According to Fantasy Pros ADP, he's going at QB 25, which is fascinating for someone that I don't think is going to start week 1. I've gone with Daniel Jones, who obviously struggled really last season. But the last time he was fully healthy, he finishes to QB 9. Now, Drew Lock was brought in, so we weren't sure whether or not that was going to be a camp battle, but Drew Lock is now injured. And when we look in terms of the situation here, the situation is better for him than it was when he finished as a QB9. He's still got the same offensive coordinator. They've brought in an elite wide receiver in Malik Neighbors, or a potentially elite wide receiver in Malik Neighbors, and they have some other interesting pieces around. Wan'Dale Robinson and Jalen Hyatt look like they could have relevancy, and could they're going to be more likely to be better NFL players than fantasy players, but they could have something to them. And Daniel Jones, if Daniel Jones plays all 17 games, he's not finishing at the QB 31. Like, his floor is probably somewhere around QB 18, QB 20. He's not the best real life NFL quarterback, but he runs the damn ball, and that's going to get you fancy points. So Daniel Jones for me, I think, is someone that again, like you say, Murph, and the same with Geno Smith for you, Hannah. They're free. It's someone free that has upside that can contribute to your team. So I think Daniel Jones is actually someone I've been drafting a lot of.
Me too.
This year. I'm going to carry on actually as we go into running back position, because for some reason I'm apparently all in on the Giants this year, and this is one where actually what you were talking about, Murph, in terms of that chaos is something I'm really interested in. So Tyrone Tracy is currently my most rostered running back on DraftKings. He was a player that I actually really liked as a prospect. He actually came in about my running back 6 or 7. So it was someone that I was really in on. And yeah, someone that I really liked when I scouted. And then he went to a situation where the only running back ahead of him in the depth chart is Devin Singletary. And people are getting excited about Eric Gray from the preseason. I don't believe that Eric Gray is going to be a thing this year. Tyrone Tracy has the upside to be a significantly better player than Devin Singletary. He's only been playing running back for 2 seasons. This will be his 2nd season playing running back, and he already looks good. He was a wide receiver in college, so you can think about what that means for him coming out of the backfield as well. the O-line in New York is underrated as well. They have, probably a top 5 tackle in Andrew Thomas. They've put in a lot of work to try and improve the O-line as a whole. So there is potential there. And with the only prospect ahead of you being Devin Singletary, who's a good player, but nothing more than a good player, I think there's potentially a chance for Tyrone Tracy to be someone that really contributes this year. So I think he could definitely be of interest. Let's come to you, Mur, for your running back sleeper. And you've got a couple to talk through.
I've got 2, and the reason why I've got them for very different reasons. All right, so I've gone with Braylon Allen of the Jets. Sort of similar reasons, not quite to the Giants, in the sense of you've got an issue with durability with Breece Hall. He's always had a little bit of a niggle. He's always sort of missed time. Braylon Allen's the next guy up, and we know they're going to run the ball. We know they commit to the run. They tend to really pick one guy and go with that. And Braylon Allen's a pretty talented back, has proven that he will be able to carry that load. So I really like the idea of just having Braylon Allen as a next guy up. And I think he'll get like a role, not a fantasy role, but I think he's going to get touches. He's going to get some work in the season. He's showing himself in camp that he can handle a role. But I think he's one of those guys. I'm not going to spend too much time. It's a pretty standard, like, handcuff to an elite. We're talking someone who can go from, like, running back 60 to running back 20 if an injury happens. Yeah. And that's really what I see in Braylon Allen. So, there's lots of guys you can pick. He's one I just particularly like, preying on that meadowlands, grass, injuries occur on that field, playing into that a little
Breece Hall before as well.
And to Breece Hall before, so that's why I play into that a little bit. The guy I want to pick is a guy who is not getting any love at all, who is continually falling in sleeper ADP. In fact, if I'm just going to pull up the latest sleeper ADP from last week, from the 6th. So Tyler Algier is going off as the RB50 in fantasy football. And he is sandwiched between Marshawn Lloyd and Antonio Gibson. And then your guy, Tyrone Tracy's going at 54. The difference is Tyler Algier is a player that the team really like, who they are quite happy to give the ball to, who will take carries. People need to get out of their head that Bijan Robinson is a bell cow. He is not going to be a bell cow. Tyler Algier is going to have a role. The coaching staff are talking about him getting 12 to 15 touches a game. That is how they see his role. That's what they're talking about. If he gets 12 to 15 touches a game in this team, there is a good chance he becomes a low-end flex play on that. Then you have the fact that if something happened to Bijan Robinson, there's not much behind him. We can go to the moon with what he can do. So you're buying a guy who, at worst, you can probably put in your flex in a bye week in a jam and will get you enough points to where he won't tank you. But if something happened to Bijan, push you over the top. And so, Raheem Morris, I've watched Raheem Morris. I'm a Buccaneers fan. Raheem Morris likes to run the ball. He likes to establish the run. He's not going to give it all to Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson's going to get a lot of the 2-minute drill work. He's going to get a lot of the important touches. He's going to get a lot of the red zone touches. So you don't have to worry about him being like a fade. I think he's a fade at his price, but not a huge one. But Tyler Algier is going to have a lot of this, what I call 20-20 work. The stuff that isn't the pretty stuff, but he's going to get enough of it to accumulate a flex-worthy role. Certainly well above RB50. So I project him to probably be somewhere in that sort of RB 30 to 36 range on the volume that he's going to get, which isn't sexy, but that will get you through your bye weeks, whatever. But then you've got that opportunity to jump into the top 12 or 15 if an injury happens. And I love guys like that because you've got this duality hybrid kind of role. So, a guy like Jerome Ford, exactly the same, and they run two RBs. Jerome Ford, he's not a sleeper because of what he did last year. He's also not a sleeper based on where he's going off the board, but he's RB 41. If we were doing like RBs outside of RB 30, Jerome Ford would be the guy I'd put in here, but they're almost the same image. These are the guys I want in that sort of 10th round to 13th round, guys that I can put in the roster and fill a hole, but have an opportunity to a great workload. And so they tick the box for me massively.
I really like that. And I'm really intrigued as well that there's a very different, the way that all three of us have gone with our running back sleepers is almost a slightly different theory. That mine is about there's an established starter who's not particularly good. So there's someone who has the ability to overtake them. Murph's is there's an elite established starter, which means there's volume there, and also we're projecting the role slightly wrong. And Hannah, yours is that pure chaos theory of we just don't know how this is going to look. And we touched on this situation earlier today, but tell us more about your running back sleeper.
So I actually looked at the sheet and I was like, oh, those guys were the ones that I really liked. I was the last one to kind of fill in my sleepers. So both of those, Tyrone Tracy, Braylon Allen, Al Jair even, were guys that I was like, oh, I like these guys as sleepers. So I agree with both of yours already. But this other guy, I just seem to keep drafting because he's in a chaotic situation. And he's on an extremely high-powered offense, the Dallas Cowboys. They finished 4th in DVOA last season on offense. Like, we know that they're going to score touchdowns and the ball's going to go down the field. And some running back has to touch it. Now, even if it's by committee, I still like pieces of this backfield because of the offense that they're in. Now, if this was a chaotic situation on a rubbish or what we consider a rubbish team, then I would be less in because, where the touch is going to come from, where are the touchdowns going to come from if you're always playing from behind. But we know that Dallas are likely going to be playing in front a lot of the time. So this gives the running backs these opportunities. So for me, it's Rico Dowdle. He is the cheaper piece of the two, which I'm still surprised about, from ADP between him and Zeke. And yeah, I get it. There are some red flags. He was, an undrafted free agent. He hasn't ultimately had a great deal of work so far in his career. But actually, when he touched the ball last season, he was reasonably efficient with it, and they clearly like him because they've kept him. So he ranked 16th in yards after contact per attempt, and he also had quite a low stuff rate, so he was 23rd out of everyone. Let's say, yes, I understand that's not on that many touches, but he did do some reasonably nice things. He was also pretty good in the receiving game, so he typically got over 6.5 yards per target when he was targeted as well. I know Zeke is always going to be there and he's going to be a thorn in the side, but there's not great reports coming out of training camp on Zeke, at this point. And I think this is an opportunity for Rico to really kind of get more work. And even if he doesn't become the outright workhorse, which I think is going to be the case, I still think he's going to be very reasonably fantasy relevant. And the last ADP I saw from him was running back 45. Now, I think people are scared that they're going to pick up another running back, but personally, I don't think they're interested in doing that. I really don't. I think they've got CD to deal with. They've got other guys to sign. They've got Dak. I don't think they're too keen to kind of going looking for running backs. Now, I might be wrong, and a week before the opener, they, I don't know, trade for Khalil Herbert or Javonte Williams or something like that. I mean, that's the fear, and I think that's why they're going so low. But if that doesn't happen, for me, Rico's a screaming value. He's going to put up fantasy points. Yeah, he might not be the overall running back one, but he's going to way outperform his current ADP, and I think that's a massive smash for me.
And I was with you, and then I got a bit worried about the Royce Freeman bump, and then actually what happened on the weekend has cemented me back to Dowdle. So Dowdle literally only played the first series.
Yeah.
That's a starter role, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sitting here saying that he's going to be the bona fide workhorse starter here, but you only play a player for the first series if he's under consideration to start week one. So
yeah,
if you needed it, and there aren't many signals I take away from preseason, but this camp battle is one. The fact that he only played the first series, he looked all right. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say he looked elite. He got like 3 or 4 carries, but he looked good. The fact they pulled him after one series, that tells you everything you need to know that he is under serious consideration for a big-ish role in the regular season. And you're right, they might trade for someone and that might trade, but he's RB47 on Sleeper. I'm so with you. I've been drafting loads of him this season. I got a bit spooked by the Royce Freeman bit because he looked good last season, Royce Freeman. But actually, yeah, that series has cemented to me that Rico Dowdle's the guy you got to get.
Pre-season is so much more about who doesn't play than who does. If you are performing incredibly in pre-season, my big argument is why are you on the field in the first place if you're that good? I'm really intrigued, Murph, to hear about yours at the wide receiver position first, because I think this might be the deepest sleeper out of all 12 that we've picked, to the extent that I did just have to check that I knew what team he was on. When I saw this name go into the show sheet. Talk us about your wide receiver sleeper.
So yeah, I don't have ADP on this wide receiver because it doesn't exist. It might do. I talked a little bit about him on the morning show on Friday on our channel. Now, so Jalen Nailor is a name, as you say, not many people would have heard of, and this is super niche and deep. He is probably going to be the wide receiver 3 for the Minnesota Vikings. Not an overly sexy role. KJ Osborne kind of did a few bits and pieces. But there's a lot of intrigue as to why I want to buy the wide receiver 3 on the Minnesota Vikings. And there's 2 reasons. The first is Justin Jefferson had a horrific injury. Yes, he came back end of last season. Yes, he looked okay. But I don't think we are back to saying that Justin Jefferson, and I haven't seen it, he might go week 1 and look absolutely elite, but I'm a little bit concerned there's a bit of scar tissue, maybe a small dip in performance, and it might just be enough to where they manage his workload until he gets to that elite level. The second is Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison was done for a DWI. Now, DWI, driving with influence, so it doesn't necessarily say it's alcohol. It could be drugs or narcotics or whatever it might be. The league has to start taking these situations very seriously. Yeah. Now, we had Henry Ruggs cause an accident and kill 2 people. We then had his teammate, his professional teammate, died in a road traffic accident the week before he got done for a DWI. This arraignment and hearing could be heard in October, and that could lead to a suspension for Jordan Addison. They might not, but it could. So if there is a suspension to Jordan Addison, it is next guy up. So Jalen Nailor has come from someone who's never heard of to he's looked pretty decent in camp. He's someone who is starting to get more role. It looks like he's going to win out the wide receiver 3 role. And when he does, there's a moth that's flown in. If he hits that role, and then you've got this, question marks over Justin Jefferson. And also on top of that, Aaron Jones is not necessarily the best pass catching back we've ever seen. That work tend to go to AJ Dillon. So they're not going to throw the ball to the backfield quite as much as they did. TJ Hawkinson is down for the first half of the season. There's a real shrinking of targets here in Minnesota. The ball's got to go somewhere. And really, that you could say that other than Justin Jefferson, there is no real lock as to where this ball's going to go if something happens to Jordan Addison. So I'm buying into the chaos and going with Jalen Nailor, because I think he's someone who really is so under the radar. You can take him in a flyer. And hey, if we find out that he's not going to if he's not going to get if we're not going to see something with Jordan Addison and he's not going to get that suspension, then hey, you can cut rid. It's an easy one to get rid of. You're investing nothing in it. You'll get him in the last round. It's completely free. So Jay there. I did have one more, which is it's just because I just finished watching the Cowboys, which is why I mentioned the thing on Rico Dowdle. I actually watched it about an hour and a half before we recorded. Jalen Tolbert. Yeah. So Jalen Tolbert didn't play at all. So he got held out. So that tells me he's won the job as the wide receiver 3. Yeah. If there is something with CD, and again, it's a high-powered offense, they can support 3 wide receivers. Looks like Jalen Tolbert could also usurp into a role. So the fact that he didn't play at all, that's a really good sign for Jalen Tolbert winning that job. And that says he's won the job. Like, that job is done.
Yeah.
So there's no debate there that Jalen Tolbert's going to have a role. And I'll take a wide receiver on the Dallas Cowboys high-powered offense. So those two.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting. And I really like when we think about Jordan Addison, we've been really focused on, well, it's wheels up for Justin Jefferson. He's going to see 25 targets a game. But that doesn't happen. Like, they need to throw the ball somewhere else. So I think this is a really interesting one. Mine is a kind of similar theory in terms of purely they have to throw the ball somewhere else. And this is a player that I've obviously watched for a good few years of his career, who started his career with 800 yards and then has never really done anything since, which is Van Jefferson, who now plays for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, this is all assuming that they don't end up trading for Brandon Ayuk. If they trade for Brandon Ayuk, ignore this, because the whole point here is volume. Van Jefferson is a good football player. He's not a great football player, but he's a good football player. And I watched him for a fair few years in LA, and he didn't quite work out because we changed the offense. Cooper Kupp stayed healthier for longer, and we ended up taking someone that worked better as sort of in that flanker hybrid XZ type role. And Van Jefferson has the opportunity to be the wide receiver 2 behind George Pickens in an offense that is going to throw the ball more than we think. Because I know we talk about the Arthur Smith-led offense loving to run the ball, and they do, but you still throw the ball sometimes as well. They've not gone out and got Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. Yes, they're both cheap, but they've not done it to never pass the ball. Now, behind George Pickens, they have really nothing else. They have Roman Wilson. Now, yes, the Steelers are fantastic at drafting wide receivers, so probably he becomes an all-pro, but wasn't a prospect I particularly loved. They have Calvin Austin, who is purely a deep threat. He's entirely a speed player. Van Jefferson, to me, and the rumours coming out of Steelers camp is that he really shined and that there's a potential for him to actually grab that wide receiver 2 role. And if he gets it, there's a path to flex level volume there. And when you're looking at Fantasy Pros ADP, you actually can't even find Van Jefferson. He is going so far down. So I think there's a real potential for Van Jefferson to have more value than people are thinking, because any value is more than people are thinking. Hannah, close us out with our wide receiver picks. I see you've gone for a slight homery one here.
Yeah, well, I was kind of umming and ahhing, who shall I pick? What shall I do? And then I was like, do you know what? No, I'm going to stick with what I know best, and that's the Bengals. Now, I know generally they're relatively stable, but we've got 2 chaotic positions, right? Running back and wide receiver 3. Now, yes, we've got a new offensive coordinator, but Zach Taylor really is very involved in that offensive scheme, and we use an extremely high number of 11 personnel last season, and I think that's probably going to carry over this season. Yes, we've got Gesicki, who's basically a big slot, and I think he will do some bits, but I don't anticipate him doing a vast amount. I think he's going to be kind of fantasy relevant in the similar way to our original tight end, CJ Uzama, who would have the odd spike weeks, the odd touchdown, but I don't think he's necessarily going to do too much. But Tyler Boyd is now gone. Someone, or a few players, are going to have to take those targets. And my bets, so I love Jermaine Burton. I think he was an awesome in the draft, but he didn't come into the game in our first preseason game until the 4th quarter, which was with the 3rd stringers. I think he's just learning the NFL game. I think he's taking a little bit of time to get accustomed to it. So I think in the meantime, that's given Andre Yoshavash a chance to really take this role and run with it. There's been so many good reports from him from camp, and it's just picked up steam the whole time through the off season. And then obviously he comes out with the ones in that first drive on the preseason game yesterday, and he has, I think, 2 really decent catches, one on 3rd down. He's doing most of the work in the slot. Now, yes, we've still got other guys like Trenton Irwin and things like that I think are going to factor in, but my suspicion is that basically Joseph Ash will be the guy who's mainly in there for those wide receiver 3 snaps. And we know that they are, maybe not wide receiver 1 fantasy valuable, but they are valuable in fantasy, and they will give you bye weeks, flex, kind of weeks, and I think spike weeks. I love him in best ball, really love him in best ball, because I think you'll get him in your lineup when he has the spike weeks, and you won't when he doesn't do too much. I think he's going to be a little bit harder to deal with in managed leagues, but I think maybe as the season goes, we're going to see more and more kind of what his role is going to be and more stability from him. But I really think that he is the guy that I would be choosing to target in redraft leagues this year over Burton. I think ultimately Burton is going to be, when T goes, Burton's going to be the second guy. But I think for this year, they're happy just to slowly ramp him up and put him in and out with kind of Chase and T when they need little breaks. And I think Joseph is going to be the guy that ultimately is that kind of wide receiver 3 glue on the team.
I think it's a really interesting one because we focus so much on rookies that we forget that other players exist. And obviously players develop as they come into the NFL. And we have this sort of perspective that every single rookie is going to succeed immediately. They're all going to hit their ceiling outcomes. And it's not going to happen. Burton is a good player. He's someone I really liked, but it's going to take a little bit of time. He is raw. So taking the bet on the second year player instead is a bet that I quite like making.
Sorry, I know we need to go much super quickly on that. I do think we've been spoiled recently when, basically wide receivers have come in and performed from the get-go. But that wasn't all, historically that was not always the case. And yes, I know a lot of these offenses in college are now much more kind of NFL type schemes, but a lot of these guys still need time to develop. Like Joseph was a 6th-round pick from an Ivy League college, that he didn't play in the SEC or anything like that. He needs time to understand the NFL, build himself up and things like that. And I think ultimately last year gave him that chance to now come into this season really raring to go.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's close ourselves off with our tight ends, and then I have a final question as well. I've gone a bit homery with tight end with Colby Parkinson. The Rams tend to feature one tight end. They tend to lead the league in 11 personnel, so it tended to just be Tyler Higbee and no one else. Colby Parkinson is going as the tight end 32 currently. He was the only tight end of the 3 currently with Tyler Higbee starting the season in pup. He was the only one that didn't play yesterday against the Cowboys in preseason, which, as we know with the Rams, is a good sign. Davis Allen and Hunter Long both saw snaps towards the beginning of the game in the first half. Colby Parkinson, it's not so much about the player, it's about the offense, and it's about the fact that the Rams don't have a particularly firm wide receiver 3. We don't have a huge amount of size at the wide receiver position, but we love to pass in the red zone. And so I think there's a potential for Colby Parkinson, given that tight ends, the only important thing is touchdowns, to be a low end tight end 1. I think Colby Parkinson has a path to upside there. Hannah, I could have said who this was going to be well in advance, and it's good to know that you can't quit him. Tell us about Cade Otton.
Well, to be honest, I'm not a massive fan of any of these late tight ends this season. I know that someone is going to appear from the ether and give us a few touchdowns and end up being a tight end 1. But it just feels a little bit messy this year, and as though none of them really have that obvious kind of path to that. Having said that, Cade Otton, obviously the Bucs have got Liam Cohen's come in. Murph probably knows better than me, and he's probably like, no, I don't agree. I think they're going to focus on other things. But, ultimately, my understanding is that he's very much a guy that does a lot of shifts and motions and tries to get people out in space. And I just think, that might give Cade Otton, a chance if everybody else is clearing out these in the intermediate, short areas and get the balls there, on third and whatever situations. So I think there's a chance that he has some touchdown upside and ultimately could end up being a low end tight end 1 this season. I don't think he's a bad player. He is playing with some other good pass catchers, and I think that ultimately is why he's not done as much. But I still hold out hope. He's in his 3rd year. we know that in position can take time, despite Sam Laporta and others. So I'm going with my guy, K. Dotton. He was my kind of start-sit guy, wasn't he? Every week, pretty much at the Titan position last season. So I'm in on him again this season. And as I say, I did struggle a bit with this one, but I'm going to stick with what I know and who I know, and I'm going to go Cade. I'd be interested to know what Murph thinks.
I think with Liam Cohen going in, I think he's basically an in-the-box or bust guy. I don't think there's enough of a role for him to be a consistent fantasy starter. But I think his red zone usage will increase. And I think with the red zone usage, he's always got a chance to get in the box. So if he gets in the box, then, he could have a stat line of 3 for 34 and a touchdown. And that's actually all you need to finish in the top 12 at the position. And that's kind of where I see K. Dotton. I think there'll be some games where they'll give up yards over the middle. Some of the defenses, especially when they're playing some of the better teams with sort of that containment, they'll take Mike Evans out of the game. There isn't another, there is some deep ball threats on the Bucks, but I think what they'll do is they'll probably utilize K. Dotton more in that running lane to free up Chris Godwin to get more productivity, is how I kind of see, similar to what we saw with Tyler Higbee when he was freeing up a lot of running lane for Cooper Kupp under Liam Cohen. That's kind of how I see it. But I do actually think his touchdown count will go up this year. So I think you'll find 6 games he'll be fantasy relevant. You've just got to guess which 6 they're going to be.
You're going to end up with that classic Mike Evans stat line of the 2 for 2 and 2.
Yeah.
Two catches, 2 yards, 2 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Let's close us out, Murph. Who's your sleeper at the tight end position?
So I'm taking Noah Fant. Now, I love Noah Fant. I thought he was actually a better prospect than TJ Hawkinson and coming out. They went to the same school, both drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. One went at 10, which TJ Hawkinson, one went at 20. Went to the Broncos, didn't utilize him. He's really struggled to find a footprint in the NFL. I'm going to ask you both a question. Because Will Disley and Colby Parkinson have left Seattle, who is the man on the depth chart behind Noah Fant?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I've no idea at all.
It's Pharaoh Brown.
Oh, wasn't he on the Texans?
He's been everywhere. 6-7 teams in 7 years. Been on the Browns, he's been everywhere, Pharaoh Brown. So that's my point. Never found a home, never stayed on the team for more than a year or two. He's not a threat. So we had a situation last year that if you took all the production of the Seattle Seahawks tight ends, they had 99 targets. They had 830-something yards. All right, only 3 touchdowns, but they all kind of cannibalized each other because there was never a consistent theme between using one over and over again. And this year you're going to have that because it is Noah Fant and Pharaoh Brown. And Pharaoh Brown's not going to get much of a look in. So this is finally the year and the time for Noah Fant to actually start to utilize. As you say, tight ends are slow producing. This is, I think, year 4, year 5. I think it's year 5 in the NFL now. So it's been a long time coming for a guy like Noah Fant, but the talent is there. People forget he's a first-round pick. And now he's got a situation where he's got no competition. So if he can get himself, there's an easy pathway to 85 targets because it's just taking all the vacated targets. I'm going to give Pharaoh Brown 15 targets this year because I'm generous. I'm going to give him a role. But yeah, 85 targets for Noah Fant is not unrealistic. You take that to 700 yards and he gets 5-6 touchdowns. He finishes at the tight end 8, like with those numbers. So you get him at 25 on Sleeper, I think. Tight end 25. I think he is going at pick 185. So, yeah, he's basically slightly above Cole. Yeah, so Colby Parkinson's going at 2.9 at the tight end 30. K. Dotton is going at 152 at the tight end 19. So he's right bang in the middle of your two. But I think the pathway and the volume, there's no one to stop him. Injury is the only thing that I think that can stop him this year.
I like it. I like it a lot. Let's close ourselves out with, I want you to pick one of your 4 sleepers as the guy that you are going to be all in on for 2024. Hannah, let's start with you.
So I think it's quite fun. We've all picked different positions, but I've stuck with my QB position. I've gone Geno. I really feel like this could be a bounce back season for Gino, and I've drafted him everywhere, so I need him to be a bounce back season. So I'm going to, manifest it through this podcast and say Gino.
I'm exactly the same. This is, as I said, this is the guy that I've drafted everywhere. So I want it to be the case, but also I firmly believe in the talent. And mine is Tyrone Tracy. Murph, I think we know from the way you spoke about him, but who's the guy you're all in on?
So I've gone with Jalen Nailor. I don't really like being all in on someone. If you've not really listened to me properly or don't know too much about me, I do like to spread risk. I do have guys that I am all in on at the top of the board, but I like to sort of spread my risk a little bit when I'm taking shots. But Jalen Nailor is just a guy that no one is talking about, which I love. I love getting in on guys. There's not a lot of buzz, but there's a clear, easy pathway to success. So, and also is if he ends up becoming like a wide receiver 2 or better, I can clip this podcast, basically just pin it to the top of my feed, and then just not have to say anything ever again and proclaim myself as a savant. So that is really.
We started by me calling you a guru, and we've closed it out by you calling yourself a savant.
Well, only if it works. Only if it works. It's not going to work. But if it does, I could just put this up on a clip and just go, right, that's me. Yeah. No one was talking about Jalen Nailor. No one knew who he was.
I'm retiring. That's me. That's me done.
That's it.
Thank you so much for coming on, Murph. That's going to close us out for today. Before we finish, where can people find you?
Assuming people want to find me after this. No, first of all, thanks very much for having me on. I've loved every minute and I'd love to come back on whenever you'll have me. You can find me over on Elon Musk's fun ground or whatever we're calling it these days, over at 5 Yard Rush. I'm handling that account now. So you can find me on there. You can find me find my work in Fantasy Pros, in Pro Football Network. I'm sort of outlining what I'm going to be doing for the season with them. And then we've got the show, 5 Yard Rush, all good podcasts. I think we're coming up to 850 odd episodes now, which is quite amazing. So YouTube channel, all of that. We're doing sort of some daily shows with some updates, and then some great guests and everything through the season. Lots of leagues and stuff that we do. So just find us on the Elon Musk Fun Ground machine. Hit me up on there, and then drop me a DM if you want to find more stuff that I'm doing and where to find stuff, and happily sort of answer any questions and go from there.
Perfect. And I really recommend anyone that's sort of getting into fantasy or starting to establish themselves in fantasy playing in one of Murph's fun leagues. They're always a fun way to realize that you don't know as much about fantasy as you think you do, no matter how smart you think you are. But it's been an absolute delight having you on, and we'll definitely have you on again. That is going to bring us to the end of the show today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe and follow us on X at Wildcard Rewind. Head on over to our YouTube channel, search for us at Fantasy Wildcard, and make sure you give us a subscribe. And we will see you next week. Take care. Button's just not working. I'm ending the recording.